Welcome to Anywhere Math. I'm Jeff Jacobson, and today we're talking about probability. Today we're going to learn about probabilities. Now, before we learn how to find probabilities, let's talk about exactly what probabilities are. Well, probability is just a number, and you can write that number as a fraction, decimal, or percent that measures the likelihood that an event will occur. Okay. Now, probabilities will range all the way from 0 up to 1. Right in the middle would be 1/2. Remember, we can write probabilities as a fraction, decimal, or percent. So I could also think of this as 0.5 or 50%. Here, well, as a decimal, it would be 1. As a percent, it would be 100%. And at the other end, 0 or 0%. Okay. Now, in the definition, it said probability is a measure of the likelihood an event will occur. Now, what that means is, well, if something has a probability of 1 or 100%, that means it is certain to happen. Okay? Today, my time is Monday. I don't know about you when you're watching this video, but today for me is Monday. The probability for me that tomorrow is Tuesday is 100% or 1. It's certain. I'm certain tomorrow is going to be Tuesday. Okay. On the other hand, down here, 0, the probability, if something is 0, we call that impossible. Okay. You may have heard people use the expression when pigs fly, right? If someone wants you to do something, you say, yeah, sure, when pigs fly. Well, they say that because it's impossible, right? Pigs are never going to fly unless you have some weird contraption, you put them in an airplane. But the point is, probability, if it's 0, well, that's impossible. It's never going to happen. Then, a probability of 1/2. Well, that's kind of right on the edge. If we're flipping a coin, what's the probability of getting heads? Well, it's 1/2 because there's only 2 sides. We would say you're just as likely to flip heads as you are to flip tails. So a probability of 1/2, we say that is as likely as not. Again, you're just as likely for that thing to happen as not happen, right? 50-50, 50% chance. Now, what about anywhere in here? Well, anywhere between 1/2 and 1, probability of that, we would say that's likely. Okay. Now, there's varying degrees of how likely it is. Obviously, if you've got something right around here, like 52%, well, that's just barely likely, right? You're pretty close to kind of a 50-50 shot. Whereas all the way up here, you're getting pretty close to certainty. This area we call likely, which means this down here is unlikely. If you got a probability that's less than 1/2 or less than 50%, it's unlikely that thing will happen. Now, the degrees of how unlikely it is depends on, where it falls in this range. Something that's only maybe 49%, well, yeah, it's barely unlikely. It's still pretty close to as likely or not. And again, somewhere down here that's pretty close to impossible. Winning the lottery, it's not impossible. It's just very, very unlikely, right? Somewhere way down here. So this is where the range of probabilities will fall, somewhere in here. Okay, let's look at an example. All right, example 1. There's an 80% chance of thunderstorms tomorrow. Describe the likelihood of the event. So when we're talking about likelihood, we want a word. Okay, we're not looking for a number or a fraction. We already have that, right? We know the probability is 80%. Well, 80%, if you remember on that little kind of number line, well, that was in the likely section. It's not certain, right? It's not 100%. It's not certain. It's not as likely as not. It's greater than 50%. So it falls in the likely. So the likelihood of the event, it is likely. Okay? Here's some to try on your own. All right, example 2. You roll a die. What is the probability of rolling an odd number? So first, let's find a little formula for probabilities. Now, if every outcome is equally likely, right? So for example, flipping a coin, I'm just as likely to get heads as I am tails. Rolling a die, all the sides are equally likely to happen, right? One side's not bigger or weighted differently as long as it's not a trick die. So each one has an equal chance of happening. So if that's the case, the formula, well, first, probability for short, we just say P. P of the event, whatever the event is, okay? We put that in brackets here or in parentheses here. Probability of the event is equal to the number of favorable outcomes over the total possible outcomes. That's how you find probability. Okay. So, for example, example 2, you roll a die. What's the probability of rolling an odd number? So I would write it like this. Well, probability of, I want an odd number, that's the event, is, well, how many favorable outcomes are there? How many ways can I roll an odd number? Well, I could roll a 1, that's odd. I could roll a 3 or a 5. So there are 3 ways, a 1, 3, or 5. There's 3 ways to roll an odd number out of the total possible outcomes. Well, there's 6 sides on a die, so there are 6 possible outcomes. So my probability is 3 out of 6, but we always simplify. So I'm going to write that as 1/2. And again, I could write that as 50% if I wanted to, or 0.5. So that is the probability of rolling an odd number. Here's some